Moving to Israel's strikes on Iran now, and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said that the attack on its main foe this weekend achieved its goal of harming Iran's defense capabilities. Netanyahu described the strikes as, quote, precise and powerful. Despite initial threats of retaliation, Tehran has tempered its response to the attacks in recent hours, suggesting an attempt to avoid further escalation. Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei said it was, quote, up to the authorities to decide how to take action. Ceasefire talks aimed at diffusing the wider conflict are expected to resume in Doha today. Fawaz Gerges is Professor of International Relations at the London School of Economics and Political Science. He joins me from London. Hello, Fawaz. Thanks a lot for your time. So, what impact could Israel's latest attack on Iran have on ceasefire talks?
Well, ironically today, the Iranian military released a statement. It says, after Israeli attacks on Iran, the statement says that Iran prioritizes a ceasefire in Gaza and Lebanon over retaliation for the Israeli attacks on Iran. So obviously, I think now we have a very, very brief, very short window of opportunity, because the Americans are redoubling their efforts in order to see whether they can really bring about a ceasefire in Gaza. I am not very optimistic, but let's hope that the Americans and the Egyptians and the Qataris will finally prevail on Israel and the Israeli Prime Minister to end the war in Gaza.
Right. It's understandable that you are not optimistic because there's been so many failed attempts to reach a ceasefire deal. But does the U.S. and its allies have enough leverage to be successful this time? What makes this time a bit different, you think?
Well, I think you're asking a big question and a very important question. One of the lessons we have learned out of the direct attacks by Iran and Israel against one another is that the Americans, the Biden administration, has leverage with the Israeli government if and when it decides to use its influence, because the Americans obviously prevailed on Israel. Israel did not really target Iran's nuclear facilities or oil or gas installations. Instead, it targeted military installations. And this tells me that if the Biden administration is genuine and interested in using leverage and influence with the Israeli government, it could really probably speed up a ceasefire in Gaza. The reason why I am not very optimistic, you have elections, presidential elections in the US on the 4th of November. And the Israeli Prime Minister gambles that Donald Trump will prevail in the elections because Donald Trump will give Benjamin Netanyahu whatever he wants. And that's why I think the Israeli Prime Minister will play for time, will try to run the clock on Joe Biden. But of course, we have to wait and see what happens in the talks in the next few days.
Right. Israel and Iran-backed proxies like Hezbollah and Hamas are still exchanging fire. So what are the chances of further escalating the conflict in the region? Because there's one thing talking about Israel and Iran not directly hitting each other, but then there's these proxies, and that doesn't seem to end.
Well, you're absolutely correct. You have really all-out war. You have Israel war in Gaza, Israel war in the occupied West Bank, Israel war in Lebanon. So the trajectory of the conflict really is escalation. Even though the region has escaped all-out war as a result of Iran and Israel targeting each other, as long as the war in Gaza and Lebanon continue, you have the risks of all-out war. And that's why the key for de-escalation is really permanent ceasefire in Gaza and a political solution in Lebanon. Without a permanent ceasefire in Gaza and a diplomatic solution in Lebanon, the reality is we could wake up tomorrow or the next few weeks and see all-out regional conflict. And that's why one would hope that the Americans will use all the cards that they have and try to convince the Israeli Prime Minister that total victory in Gaza, total victory in Lebanon is almost an impossible mission. And the reality is many millions of Israelis would like the Israeli hostages in Gaza to come back home. And also Palestinians who have suffered a great deal. I mean, you have a catastrophe in Gaza, in particular in northern Gaza, as you just mentioned, in the past 3 weeks. Almost 800 civilians have been killed in northern Gaza just in the past, 20 days or so.
Right. Middle East analyst Fawaz Gerges, thank you very much for your insight.
Thanks.